Hello and welcome to On the Trail with Miles James Dean. In the past several episodes, the focus has shifted back and forth among the drivers, the horses, the route, and the people I have met and interviewed while on the journey. And I did not place much emphasis on the scholars that were interviewed and their viewpoints on the topics discussed during our interviews. And so today, I'm going to share some of the insights that were shared with me.
It's been in that time frame where I moved from thinking about contributions to looking at Africans, and then African Americans, as being essential and integral to the nation building process here in America. Now, what does that mean? During the in time of slavery, they were the economic foundation to mercantile capitalism and ultimately industrial capitalism, and provided the economic engine power for the development of these capitalisms. A very integral part of it as slaves. They also created a society and culture that allowed them to not only withstand and resist enslavement, but to create their own world of who they were and come to some kind of definition of freedom for them in a very limited way. So that when slavery came to an end, they had created institutions, value systems that had pretty much prepared them for the further development of society and becoming an integral part. And from the end of slavery well into the 20th century, they did two things. They created their own world for themselves to live in and enjoy themselves, to create leisure and family and all those great institutions. But they also protested the severe discrimination and segregation. Now, you can raise a question, contributions. Well, if you look at what's involved in building a neighborhood, a community, an urban environment, particularly an urban environment, all kinds of institutions are created as rural blacks migrated to urban areas, settled among those African Americans already there, and made for a tremendous mix of people who began to shape a different lifestyle. And even today, with the demise of Jim Crow and the end of segregation laws, we've gotten the opportunity to do all kinds of things. Our mobility has increased threefold. We continue to create. We continue to lead corporations, own businesses. We continue to kill ourselves. Freedom is unusual, but we have it. So I left the contribution school of thought to validate my existence and my identity. I didn't need it. We are here, and we're just as much as a part of this society as you are, even though there were restraints on us.
In terms of Booker T. Washington and Du Bois and their different philosophies.
Mm-hmm.
Which one? I've heard it said that Booker T. his philosophy was pretty much overlooked by the intellectuals of the day. But as we look back in retrospect, that perhaps his self-help was what really needed to be adopted as opposed to Du Bois' position. What do you think?
That's a good question, and that answer goes back some 25, 30 years when I was a young master's degree student. Because I did a series of lectures on the great controversy and concluded that it's a simplistic view of the means and ends of African Americans. But it was an acceptable view to take, that you had this radical and this conservative. I concluded that African Americans needed both of them. They needed somebody who would protest. And Du Bois and the NAACP, up to a certain point, became that radical force in black life. Washington, being based in the South, was a political realist. He understood the devil that he was dealing with. So he wanted to create a posture and a relationship with whites to create a black business class, a black middle class, a group of property owners. And he succeeded to a large extent. Now, the problem with that was you had to give up these rights or not fight as strong and hard for them. But Washington was clever because behind the scenes, he fought many segregation cases in the South. So it was hard to read his persona. And I've always characterized Washington as an economic nationalist. I've always done that with him. And the reason why I characterize him in that regard was, what was he talking about? Economic development in black communities, whether they were north or south. He wanted to see the rise of property holdings in African Americans increase. He wanted to create a black business class because he knew that the goods and services of this class would be consumed by black people, and they would have the black market. So that's pure economic nationalism. But when you look at the other dimensions of him, yeah, he was conservative. There's no question about that. But you see, the reason why I think it's a simplistic analysis, there were all types of blacks with various philosophies going back and forth between the two polars. And the two poles were created because they were just easy to deal with. But in between, there were blacks of all kinds of persuasions and ideologies and differences. When Marcus Garvey comes to the United States, the reason why he comes to the United States is to study what Booker T. Washington was doing. Yeah. But he had died when he got here. And you know, Garvey was pure economic development. So I developed those ideas about the great controversy some 20, 25 years ago. Still hold to them.
Do you have a specialty area that you
No.
look into?
See, I'm a subject specialist in Afro-American history and federal records. Now, what does that mean? the U.S. government began to document itself and its relationship to the American citizenry during the American Revolution, Continental Congress, U.S. Constitution is created, United States of America is created and established. And from that point on, we are part of federal record documentation. So even though I have special interests, like when I was a PhD student, I studied urban populations and urban geography and urban history. If I were teaching in the academy, that would be my special interest. But my work in the last 28 years have covered at least a dozen topics. At least a dozen topics.
Are any of those topics specific to the period that my journey covers, the 1500s through the 1800s?
Oh, yeah. Well, when you look at that time frame that you're covering, that's a lot of ground to cover. Because you're looking at development of an early plantation system, young urban seaport systems, mercantile capitalism, and the integration of Africans and African labor into these economic systems. And they're changing over time. And by the time you get to the 19th century, urbanization and industrialization has taken place. And you have to look at that impact that African Americans played here, and probably the greatest was the American Civil War. Yeah, the American Civil War, the social revolution that destroyed slavery. I'm a senior archivist, but I'm a subject area specialist in Afro-American history and federal records. Meaning, I write, I do public programs and forums, and research the documentation of African Americans in federal records. And that's why I said our documentation in federal records go back to the colonial period. Yeah.
And this is what you've been doing for 28 years.
28 years.
Are you one of a few African American?
Yeah. I have a unique job. I don't know too many people. There are hundreds of people who are good in Afro-American history and culture. But I don't know many, if any, who specialize in the documentation of African Americans in federal records.
The documentation of African Americans in federal records.
You see, you have to understand the government. The government created million cubic feet of records because it's a business. It's running the government agencies and their interaction with other government agencies, state governments, and the American citizenry. And much of that relationship is documented in their records. We keep probably anywhere from 1 to 5% of those records each year that the government creates. And we've been doing that since the Civil War. We have appraisal units that work with government agencies that determine the documentary evidential value, what we call intrinsic value of records. Is it informational? Is it evidentiary? Does it tell a story?
So the story that's being told about the Africans and African Americans in this country on the website of the National Park Service, did much of that documentation come from the National Archives?
A lot of it did. We have their records here. National Park Service Record Group, I think 75.
And so then they had to come here for the research, or come here for the records, or bring their research and distribute it here.
Well,
how did that work?
When a government agency creates records, they will remain active anywhere from 5 to 20 years. When those records are inactive or no longer needed, they go into what's called a general record schedule. And a determination is made of what record series will be kept and what will be destroyed. And that's when our appraisal units go in and work with agencies. You determine, let's keep this, you can throw that away. Service in the 30s, that was fighting discrimination.
The Park Service was fighting discrimination in the 30s, you said?
Yeah, because many southern states segregated their parks, and some of those parks were owned by federal entities.
The 1930s, you're saying?
Yeah. Yep. I just had a researcher in here who was looking at the parks along the Shenandoah Valley. Because he wanted to know what was the Fed doing about, it's all right, I'm not going to finish this. What was the Park Service doing about discrimination? Now, see, in the 30s and 40s, the government really didn't have an anti-discrimination policy. But they had African-American racial advisors that was working to change that. In fact, I wrote an article on Robert C. Weaver, the first black HUD secretary appointed by Johnson. His federal career started in 1933, and he was a federal bureaucrat through World War II. And his mission was to create an affirmative action program for African Americans. In fact, the name of the article was Robert C. Weaver, Finding Place for the Negro, the Groundworks for Civil Rights. Because I considered Weaver one of the major architects to the civil rights movement, creating the ideology for civil rights.
And affirmative action.
And affirmative action. If you look at his work, that's clearly what he was doing.
So, getting back to the National Park Service, because on my website, I've linked to the National Park Service and the work that they have done on Africans in the 1600s, 1700s, and the research that the individuals did, I imagine, came from
probably much of it did
from the National Archives.
Right. Yeah, the Park Service has really had an abrupt change in what it's doing, particularly in its national park system, because the biggest component of the Park Service is the Civil War battlefields and monuments. And I was at the meeting of the Park Service, the Organization of American Historians, the American Historical Association. That meeting took place in 1994 here in Washington. And the historians argued, and I was a part of that argument, that the emphasis should be on slavery and the causes of the Civil War, and not the Civil War battles and commanders, because the associations felt that Americans really didn't understand this war. All they looked at was the battles and the generals and the great armies. But what does this war mean?
Let me ask you, do you subscribe to the ideology that the Civil War was the cause for slavery? That Civil War, that slavery rather, was the cause for the Civil War.
Definitely. No question about it. But
as opposed to economics.
You must understand the nature and beast of slavery. It was the most powerful institution in American society up to 1861. It infested everything. Politics, society, culture, economics. It was everywhere. People were making money. The big issue with the South, and this is a political question, was the expansion of slavery in the new territories. Because the South wanted the institution to grow because it bore direct relationship to their power in Congress. The first 16 presidents of the United States, 13 were slaveholders. Half the Congress were slaveholders. The Supreme Court, most of the justices were slaveholders. It was everywhere. And the Southern leaders were not going to give that up, because every state that was coming in the Union, up to a certain point, had to be either free or slave. But when Lincoln said, you can keep your institution, he said, I won't touch it. But you can't go into the new territories. And Southern leaders knew then and there, we're not going to survive, but we can't do that. If you look at the ordinance of secession from January to April, when the southern states are seceding, every one of them stated that slavery had to be defended. Every one of them. Now you tell me that slavery didn't cause a war.
Well, I certainly won't tell you that.
Well, it is an institution, but there are a lot of components to the institution. There's a human dimension to it. There's an economic dimension to it. There's a culture dimension to it. And there's certainly a political dimension to it. Yeah. In fact.
So it was a way of life that they were defending, as well as economics.
Yeah.
A culture, okay.
Yeah, you got to understand, economics is just a part of your way of life.
Okay.
You determine what economics you're going to create and develop and live with. And for the Southern slave-owning class, much of their freedom is predicated on enslavement and the wealth that their slaves produce.
But wasn't Lincoln famous for, not famous, but did he in fact not want Africans to be involved with the struggle, the Civil War, that eventually ensued? Well,
initially, he didn't see it as a war to free slaves and destroy slavery. His intent was to stop the rebellion and bring those states back into the Union. So the preservation of the Union was utmost in his thinking. But one of the elements and dynamics of the war was that the slaves put their agenda on Lincoln's agenda. When those Union armies went into the South, they didn't stay on the plantation. In '61, there was a trickle going behind the federal lines. By the summer of '63, there were thousands, waves of slaves going behind Union lines. But see, by then, Lincoln was pretty much transformed in his thinking about a war to preserve the Union, really to a war to free slaves and destroy slavery. But he had other forces to help him, like Frederick Douglass and black abolitionists, white abolitionists, the press, Union generals and commanders. Yeah.
How extensive has your research been on revolts, slave revolts?
I've done some, but not a lot, because
Here in Baltimore, area?
well, most of your revolts took place in the South and in South America and the Caribbean. Now, during the colonial period, there were a couple revolts in northern colonies, like in New York around 1712. Yeah.
So Denmark,
South Carolina, that was 1830s.
and then there's, of course, Nat Turner.
Now, these were signs of protest and resistance. The slaves developed and devised a variety of strategies of fighting the institution. And revolt was just one way, the most deadliest way.
And some other ways may have been
Running away. After 1825, according to John Hope Franklin and Lawrence Swagner in their book Runaway Slaves, after 1825, an average of 25 to 35,000 slaves a year ran away. Now, half of them were captured and brought back, but what does that say? Slaves were willing to run away. Yep. I like the idea of you bringing attention not so much to yourself, but to the study of history. I, like the Organization of American Historians, believe that most Americans, white and black, and now Hispanic populations, really don't understand and know enough about American history. American history is very complex, but very intriguing, and the only way you're going to learn it is to read about it, go to lectures, do things, and go to public history programs.
How do you view...
And go to museums.
Okay. How do you view African American history in the context of American history? Do you see separate or...
No, it's the same. African American history is American history. Now, what do I mean by that? It's our experience in being Americans. Okay? After 2 or 3 generations of Africans being here, we were Americans. It was our national identity, and it began to shape our character. As we moved through the 19th century into the 20th century, as our rights increased, we became just as individualistic in upholding our rights as other groups. But our history is unique because slavery and race surrounds it and makes it distinct from American history. But it is American history.
So do you think that there should be an African American studies separate or included?
Oh yeah, I mean that's an old academic battle. when I was an undergrad student in the 60s, those battles were fought then. Yeah. No, it's legit.
I think Dr. Malefia Santi has written a book entitled African American Studies that he would like to see in the high schools, I believe.
It would help, because that is where you get started. See, history at the high school and elementary level is superficial. It's not going to go very deep, because you're not dealing with sophisticated minds. It's not until you get into undergrad school, and here's where the privilege comes into play. Kids who can afford college and do college work, they get the benefit of studying history if they're interested in African American history and culture. They can do history, or they can do African American studies, which is different. I was a history major. I learned the craft of the historian. I just applied it to the African American context. African American studies is the study of all aspects of black life and culture and history. Religion, politics, culture, you name it. It comes under African American studies. And you can pick that up with Ethelbert when you get down to Howard.
Yes, I will be meeting with him.
Now, the other thing that has broadened out in the last 20-some years is the diaspora studies. Looking at the Caribbean basin and South America. Because the largest percent of Africans were deposited in Brazil, South America, and then the Caribbean, and then the continental USA. See, we just happen to live in one of the advanced civilized societies, but our numbers are small relative to that of Brazil and the Caribbean base.
In fact, I think I once read that many of the Africans that were brought into the Americas came from Brazil as opposed to from Africa.
Yeah.
Because they were less rebellious. They were really inculcated.
It was what they call a seasoning kind of process for many, and then they were shipped to the North American continent. But there were many brought straight from Africa to other colonies, and ultimately the United States, reading at certain levels.
And the importance of knowing your history, what was that?
I think it shapes your identity. I truly believe that. I think Carter G. Woodson was absolutely right when he talked about knowing your history, where you came from, where you're at, and the prospects of where you can go, and it helps define who you are. I believe that absolutely. I've never had problems with my identity. And I've always said the reason why is because I was a serious student of history. Yeah. I think we've lost certain social values and ethos in our communities. And not knowing our history is a part of it. Is a part of it. Right.
But more so a loss of social value.
Respect for life, and respect for others. Those kinds of values are kind of lost out in many of our communities. Especially respect for life. Killing ourselves. We've joined American society in eating ourselves to death. You know, there's an obesity syndrome out there. And it's killing us just like it's killing them. So we are really Americans. But we have to know when we need each other, because we will always have an interdependency. Yeah, that's historically been our forte. I'll never criticize blacks for manifesting their individuality. Who doesn't want to be different? Nothing wrong with that. But understand your dependency on other blacks and institutions. Why do you think there's so many thousands of black organizations out there? Because we need each other. Yeah. That is the collective group consciousness that we have. And we do it for a variety of reasons. Protection, advancement, all that good stuff. Yeah. That's a part of the institutions we created for ourselves.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.